Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host Mitchell J. Rabin, and we're very glad that you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have another very interesting show. Today we're going to be seated with and talking with Jyoti, the author of this book, An Angel Called My Name. Jyoti has a fascinating background, and she'll be speaking to us about that. She's got a PhD in transpersonal psychology. She was involved very deeply in something called the Spiritual Emergence Network, helping people organize their understanding and their experience of deeply spiritual experiences that they were having and did not have a context to relate it to in this Western world. She's done a number of very interesting things and has had a world of experience inside herself. Spiritual experiences, psychological experiences, and she'll be sharing with us from that deep richness that has brought her to this point in her life, doing a fair amount of breath work in different parts of the country and working very closely with people in the domains of healing and basically creating a better world. But I am actually going to hand this over now to Jyoti so she can share with you in a way that Native Americans often do. They share with themselves. They share with us what it is about themselves they want us most to know. On that note, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sure.
Well, to introduce myself, my name is Jyoti. My name was actually given to me by a Nandima yogi. He was 116 when he died. He was a Kundalini Mahayoga teacher. And I got brought to them when my Kundalini erupted into some experiences where my body did a lot of shape-shifting, and I ran out of resources in my transpersonal world that really seemed to understand what was going on. And
Mahayogi means great yogi.
And so I ended up in their tutelage for a while to get the scriptures and the understanding with words and study that would help me understand a portion of the process that I was in. So that was how I got my name, which was interesting because I was at the Sundance one year when I was given by the native people the name Star. And Jyoti means divine light, so really it's the same experience.
In Sanskrit.
It's the same experience of energy, actually. A star is light, so it's the same piece.
So it's in common from the two different cultures. That's wonderful.
And that's kind of what my life work is. I am a collage, I suppose, of things coming together. I think we all are. A lot of the old people talk about the rainbow people. And I think we've all lived so long at this point in time that we have a lot of trails behind us that we're needing to put together somehow. My indigenous roots go from my father's side and some from my mother's side, but I was a girl raised in the South, so there's not a lot of description or talk about that because of the way things were held in a very prejudicial kind of way.
Yeah, there wasn't pride in that connection.
There was
if
fear
anything,
and
disdain
danger and a lot of other things, unfortunately. I think it's probably when we go back to look at things sometime from now, we'll look and see that when we locked up our indigenous people's way of life, we lost our soul in this country. And I have a great, great regard for them and for an old Cherokee woman that lived a long time before me, a Cherokee woman. So that's more that tribe, that lineage that I feel are at the roots of who I am. And I didn't go looking for it. I had a Native American teacher, Tico Ramon Perez was his name, who came to visit Europe, being at the Jung Institute over there in the study of dreams and psychoanalysis for children, and started to learn from him, and he began to awaken a lot of the memory in me and in my system. And because I don't go looking for things, I wait till God puts it in front of me, and then I get to embrace it and bring it into myself, and it usually then helps me understand the process I've just gone through. So it's not because I've read something that's generated the idea. It's more that the experience has visited me, and then the teacher or the teachings show up to validate just what's going on and help me understand it. If I were to describe myself, I'm a mother first, then I have two grown men, Kirk and Scott. I didn't name them that because of Star Trek, although I get teased a lot about that. But it was way before Star Trek that they came along.
But perhaps it bears has some bearing anyway.
Might,
Yeah.
truly might. They're like that, though. They're very courageous young men.
Yes.
And we went through a lot of growing up together, because when I first started to wake up, I realized that I was in very abusive situations, and my love of my kids is what brought me out of those situations. I don't think I had enough, feeling for myself back then. I didn't have any self-concept of me yet. I was what my culture wanted me to be, but I wasn't me, and I got lost in the process of trying to be what my culture wanted me to be.
Now, was this prior to the Kundalini experience or after?
Definitely.
Definitely prior.
What happened, to back up in some of my history around that, is that my father in 1974 died, and in the moment of his death, I had an out-of-body experience with him. I literally left the body with my father, and I saw this incredibly beautiful, bright light appear in the room and come into the corner of the room. And I watched my father walk into it, and then all of a sudden I was back down on the bed, and I watched my father's body react to the soul's withdrawal from it. It reacted with some muscular release. And it would have scared me terribly if I hadn't just been where I'd been. But I had seen where my father was, so I knew this was, his bodysuit somehow. And it changed my life, because what everyone had told me death was about, this scary, horrible thing, it just wasn't that way. I couldn't talk to my family. My family didn't really want to hear about the mystical experiences that went on, though people saw them, because there was a lot of incredible things that went on around my father before he died, leading up to his death, as well as that day of death, which I talk more about in my book. But then afterwards, no one in my family really wanted to talk about it. It's how we deal with death. Everybody's sad and crying and missing someone, but the doorway they just went through, usually alone. Sometimes, many times scared, because they don't know the terrain.
Sure.
They don't have anybody to guide them through it. It's a very big journey to take on all by yourself without any knowledge of how to do it.
It's a major departure from life as we know it in 3 dimensions.
Completely. And so my dad initiated me. And 8 years later, I began to share about this experience. And in that process, it was like the archetypes took the cork out of my bottle, and the genie came out, and then the Kundalini started to rush on.
That's when that started to rise.
It started to rise in me, and luckily I've been always fortunate enough to have a teacher in front of me for that next level of explosion of oneself, or implosion of oneself, whichever we like to say that.
Sure. Combustion.
Yeah.
At least.
The soul combusts to make room for itself in the temple.
Yeah.
Anandima describes it in a really good way, I think. She says the Kundalini happens in 3 phases, and the first phase is when that divine fire goes up to burn all the impurities in the system and to heal the cracks. And once that's complete, then the second part happens, which is the cooling of the form, and that's literally where you start to taste the sweet honey that will drop down and can be cupped by, if you have yogic practices, can be cupped at the back of the throat, and you can swallow in it.
The nectar.
It's beautiful nectar. And the form starts to cool so that the third divine being can step inside and walk around here in this creation. And so I think...
And use the vessel for its work.
Right. It's completely right. So that Kundalini process started to happen with Dad's death, and I was a girl working in Texas. Things like this weren't something people knew about or talked about.
Is God the supreme joker, or what?
Definitely an interesting...
There's no question about it to me. How do you take a nice girl from Texas and put that through her body and expect her to understand what side is up? But that's what happened.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
That's what happened, and every time, even though I left Texas at one point, and this American dream, that was one of the big things, is stepping in, as you individuate, you at some point you have to get to a place where you have to step out of the collective as you know it.
Yeah.
And that's when Carl Jung said that's when you must continue to follow what's called you deep into the psyche so you can retrieve it and bring it back and hand it to those others that are in that collective, because at first they'll rage at you. But once you come back and hand them their gift, then and only then will they be appeased, is how they taught me there. And I found that to be true, and you have to step out of that collective sometimes more than once. Because you get, it's kind of like, if you watch it, it's like a flower unfolding a bit. I mean, first you're all squished up in this little form you have, this idea you have of who you are, and then all of a sudden something breaks free and the flower starts to blossom and you end up in another collective. You end up with a different set of friends, different teachings,
Sure.
different ideologies, different way of identifying yourself, and then boom, it happens again and you're a little bit wider and you end up in a different circle and so forth.
Sure.
I mean, even in life where people are having such mystical awareness in their lives, we do that naturally as we evolve from being a child to school to college and so forth. I think the difference in our Western world is that we think the whole world thinks this way. I think it's our big, arrogant place that we have to really start to accept about ourselves and start to work on a little bit for some more humility, because we have great power in this world. I have a place in the jungle, and we go into the Amazon, and there's machines there from the West and T-shirts there from the West.
Oh, yeah.
We've reached way into a lot of these places, and I think
radios, televisions,
all of it.
It might be just one television per community, but they're connected. It's there, and they love it. And it has the potential to serve a very fine purpose, a very high purpose.
It can, and it can also bring the shadow of it. If we stay in denial, we just spread our shadow in an unconscious way.
Sure.
Rather than transforming or holding that shadow so that it can be the potential for our next world work.
Of course. Now, from the experiences that you've had, Jyoti, especially the Kundalini, which is so powerful and transforming in your life, and it's very much a point of pivot for the way your life has unfolded and continues to unfold. Describe what it was like to be involved with the Spiritual Emergence Network and being involved with other people who have been having comparable or similar experiences. What was that like for you, and what is the status of it now?
What it was like for me was that it was one of those times when my flower popped open again.
First, perhaps you should just tell people, beyond what my initial definition was, maybe let people know what it is. The network is.
The network, Spiritual Emergence Network, was a grassroots organization that was founded by Christina Groff. And her and her husband Stanislav Grof were traveling around the world already, breathing people in holotropic breath work, and through that work we're having a lot of people come up to them after the sessions saying, these are the kinds of mystical experiences I've been having anyway before you arrived in town, and my gosh, there's a whole bunch of us here, and how do I talk about this? What do I do with this? How do I bring this into my life? I can't speak to my family about it. I can't speak to my therapist about it. They all think they're gonna call me crazy, and they're right. In most cases, that would happen. So what do I do with this? What do I do with this? Why is it here? And Christina got so many requests for it that at one point she got a vision visited her, and in the vision she saw the globe with this network reaching out all over the place, and that's when she realized she needed to start these. At that year, during the early years, it was called Spiritual Emergency Network. As we grew it, we realized that it didn't have to become an emergency if we received it in its emergent state, and so they changed it to the Spiritual Emergence Network. It's
so important because, just to share with people, it's taking a very precious, delicate, highly vulnerable kind of experience, the kind that people spend lifetimes looking for and seeking to cultivate in their spiritual work. And it happening in a Western context with Western psychiatric nomenclature, it's considered something like psychotic. And people who are having these have, as you're saying, nowhere to go, no one to turn to, no sangha, no community to speak of it,
Right.
and for support. So this was providing some semblance of support.
It's incredible. I mean, I've got lots of horror stories that I could tell you about people being misdiagnosed. I mean, it is included in the DSM-4 now, which was remarkable. They call it religious problems, but it's spiritual emergency situations. And when we were getting ready for that to happen, we were working with the 3 doctors that brought that into being, and it went through the first time, which is remarkable for the DSM-4. The DSM-4 is the diagnostic manual that's used by all helping professionals, and it influences the diagnostic manual in Europe. There's a lot of linkage with how our Western medicine sees things and how insurance looks at things. And so, until this time, it had not been included in there, and we
it's the psychological, psychiatric mindset put onto paper, in a way.
Yes, and so we didn't want it to be classified as pathology.
Exactly,
which is what can happen, because it can look the same way.
Yeah.
The difference is the development of the ego. Someone has an ego and moves into that place, or that place moves in, takes them over like a big wave.
Sure.
They have an ego that'll be tossed around in the sea, but at some point it'll pop out and it'll be able to utilize that in a way that helps to bring a contribution to their surrounding community. So these people that are going into this state are the midwives of our new consciousness, and we, in oldest ways, we used to recognize them, we used to hold ceremony for them, we used to not label.
It was an initiation. It was honored.
Very much because God had visited that place, that person.
Yeah.
And that person then was receiving something holy. And so the whole village would circle around to hear what that experience had been about, and in that process integrate what they learned into the village. And that's how a lot of the villages stayed more balanced in their way of loving and living together. And so,
well, because that boy or girl was a conduit for a holy voice and actually upped the spiritual dimension of the community.
Completely. In a conscious way. You know, I mean, they were listening, and they were to what God said, because everything was God-centered.
Yes.
Everything was of God. Everything is of God. This is our creation. We are all part of creation. But in those days, we had relation with creation. But when we locked our indigenous people, when we put them into a state of genocide, we started to commit suicide to a people. I believe the earth will make it. The earth is a very beautiful being, and she's survived dinosaurs and all kinds of things, you know. But I'm not sure our species as a people will make it. She'll reach a place where she'll have to do something if we don't. And so I believe the emergence process that's happening all over the globe, and I witness it daily. I have a lot of work because of it. I don't go seeking it. It is there. I'm a midwife for the Great Mother, and that's what my work in the world has really brought me to understand. And when I got on the phone lines at SEN for the first time, a lot of the experiences that I had been going through that felt so lonely and so tumultuous and so crazy, all of a sudden made sense, because I could talk personally with the people on those phone lines and say to the woman in Texas who called, no, you're not crazy, and no, you're not of the devil.
Right.
And you are experiencing what Christ went through, and now you must learn who to speak to about this. When we ended up putting spiritual emergence, our religious problems, we ended up in the DSM-4, we ended up putting it in the V codes, so that people would start to get trained in ground rounds between the difference between psychosis and mystical states of awareness, how to treat them, how to integrate them, and to how to assist them. And now that's happening. They are being trained.
This is a breakthrough. This is a major breakthrough in the state of consciousness, or I should say unconsciousness, actually, of the psychiatric and psychological communities. For people who have made such a grand study, supposedly, of the nature of the psyche and of consciousness, they really haven't done a lot of their historical homework. And so being able to upgrade them, in a sense, if you will, based on your input, and I'm sure colleagues of yours' input into the DSM text, is a major contribution.
I think they'll also help us bring humanity in more humane and compassionate ways back to our medical systems. our medical systems have not, because people want it to be that way, they've lost their sense of humanity. They've sterilized everything so much that they've removed the person that's got the issue going on. They don't talk to you. You're like this person that has no voice over in the corner while they're all deciding what to do with this object. But we've forgot how to relate with our hearts and say, what's going on, and is this medicine working for you? What's the spirit of this medicine I'm giving you? Let me tell you what it does. We don't do that.
That is not Western medicine. That is not Western medicine.
No, but ironically, in my work, I have a lot of physicians coming to learn, and we work together, handshaking together.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a powerful experience. I've never believed that we should step back and fight Western medicine. I believe that it's time for Western medicine to, in its own maturity and with some integrity, realize it's got to breathe out to include more of a holistic way of thinking.
Agreed.
So a lot of my work from all over, through medical work with people that are ill, to psychological world, through the spiritual emergence doorway, come back to the way people knew how to live in a village a long time ago.
Yeah. That's sacred. Since you mentioned breath, the out-breath in particular, what is it? Tell a word or two, if you would, about the breath work that you're doing. And since your goal is, Jyoti, to really create a better world and to create that original kind of village life, that archetype where people get along and cooperate and harmonize and is God-centered, how is the breath work in particular related to cultivating that image?
Well, the breath work, which I call Mayatri breath work, it comes from the Buddhist word meaning to embrace all of oneself in a friendly way. And I don't believe that we do anything. The people that we've trained with the Mayatri are facilitators to a process. And so we set safe container. And because I have so much of my own rooted system in more indigenous practices, it has more of a shamanic kind of feeling to it and more of a mediumistic work. And so my healers kind of go empty in themselves so they can become vehicles of service for spirit, however that's going to work out that day. And we use music, we use the quick breathing, we take them down in a guided way, which is similar to all of the different varied types of breath works. And then we do a lot of hands-on healing work. So I would say, which has surprised me, because I didn't know it was going to go the way that it has. But the people that end up coming to it, I would say over 50% of the ones that are coming to it are coming with serious illnesses, and spontaneous things are happening for them.
Interesting.
And they're
serious illnesses such as
MS, cancer, tuberculosis, things like that.
And there are spontaneous shifts happening in them relative to those particular disease patterns?
Yes. What I think happens is when they find what's out of balance, and the sound and the energies that visit begin to kind of, the way it's shown to me, it's like there's a web of energy around us, and the webs get torn, and the energy can go in and find those places that are torn, and the person mends themselves, and the balance can then return to the system. And the moment we touch with our soul, the moment that we involve back into our body has a different life, and it has its life source. Most of us are out of the body. We're in our heads a lot, but we're not in our bodies. We're really frightened of our bodies. We're really scared to have relation, and that was the second big lie that I discovered that had been in the culture, was death was a bunch of propaganda around death that wasn't true. The second was about the body. The body changes form. It's a incredible energy, and it can change form. I've seen people after a 13-hour prayer service with cancer that was all over their body, in their bones, in their brains, in their lungs. I've seen them through that prayer by next morning it's gone. Now, I never understood, I never understood why we don't study these anomalies. I don't understand when you have people, and it happens out there through lots of different ways that these spontaneous experiences take place for people. Why don't we talk to these people? Why don't we see what they did? Why don't we say, well, it's just a fluke? It's just, you were just lucky, my dear.
Jyoti, there's no money in it. That's why.
It's an economic issue. A lot of our culture is based on lies for an economic issue,
of
and
course.
we're all going broke.
Isn't that ironic?
Yeah, it is. And people out there are working 3 jobs to pay all this stuff for a material world. One of the things that's really exciting, though, it's not to paint a bad picture. We're not bad people here. We're good people with the good hearts. But we know how to master in the West, our American people. We know how to master this physical world. We've learned how to move it. Now, can we evolve and grow into a maturity that will allow us to gain the same level of mastery with our psychic selves? Because there's a power there that one put in link with our material plane opens a world that's very different than the one we're looking at right now.
God, yes.
And our children need us to take the time to do that.
Exactly. We have to take a step from the outer into the inner. And as masterful as we are out here with the externals, we need to become that masterful on the inside, and then we would actually have a different world. We have about a minute. It is, isn't it? Thank you. We just have about a minute left. You're working on a CD with a few other wonderful, notable,
Graceful
people.
Passages.
Yes, just share with us
just quickly,
a word about that.
It's a CD that's going to be that's come out. It's just now being released. It's got Ram Dass. It's got Kubler-Ross. It's got some of the grandchildren of Gandhi. It's really remarkable, and it's all for people going through the passage of death, or maybe into such serious processes in their own personal life that it will be that same archetypal doorway. So it's beautiful. I'm surprised. They came and asked me to just go empty like I do and let the mother give some words to people that would add a comfort to them during this big passage. And so I did that, and then immediately went on to work. And then a year and a half later, they sent it back to me. I had no idea what she had said, and it came back with music to it. And so I got to hear what she had to say, along with these other beautiful people and some of the message. I think we're in a time of really needing to step out of denial. Our culture is in a death process. And I hope that Graceful Passages begins to open a door for us to talk about that as a culture, because if we don't and we stay in denial, we become destructive in our behaviors. We have a choice right now to make. The beauty way of the indigenous beings of this planet have a secret that will help us walk through this doorway with integrity and compassion and heart. And that's what I wish for these next 7 generations.
Thank you.